the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And kick off the recording, and we are back on a lovely, warm, cool Wednesday morning. No, Thursday. Whatever day we release. Hi, Taylor. How are you?
Hey, good.
You should be going to see Dan Carlin later this afternoon, which is going to be really exciting. We can talk about it next week on Monday, which...
No, it's the 21st.
I totally saw that on the link that I looked up on his website and immediately forgot that information. So...
It's a Thursday. You were close.
There you go. I know it's in LA, and I know his name is Dan Carlin, and you're going to go see him. So... Aces. Okay, so we'll go ahead and dive right in. My topic is a little bit unusual compared to everything else because it's kind of true crime, but also kind of like social phenomenon. It kind of wrapped up into one. Mm-hmm. So,
all right,
I think you'll find it interesting. Hopefully our listeners do. Hopefully somebody does. So I am going to cover a phrase that we kind of hear less and less these days. Despite the fact that this phenomenon that the phrase is based on happens a lot more often, it is the phrase going postal, which I'm sure many of us are very familiar with.
Indeed.
Okay. Taylor, can you guess how? So let me start by saying going postal is a colloquialism we use for mass shootings. There's a reason for it that I'm going to get into. And let me start by asking Taylor if you can guess how many mass shootings do you think we had in 2022?
Oh my God. In America?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
In the rest of the world, 4. In America, 300.
You're so off. It's not even funny.
How many?
636.
Jesus fucking Christ, America. Fuck you.
For context, the entire 1940s had 3 mass shootings.
Cool.
The entire 1950s had 5. The entire 1960s had 13. And then we kind of pick up the pace in the 1970s. so that's when we hit 33. And
oh my God.
And then the 1980s, we didn't do as well. We had 36. And then we kind of started hitting this crescendo with mass shootings around the 1990s, around 59. And then from there, it just ticked up and up and up. And now every year is the most mass shootings. Actually, what's funny is 23. Funny. What's interesting is that 23 had like a few less mass shootings than 22. So it was one of the few years where there was like a dip in mass shootings. But whatever. It's just going to keep going up.
I wonder what it could be. I'm joking. I know exactly what it is.
Why do you think it went down? Is that what you mean?
No. I mean, I wonder why we have so many. It's the guns. That's my answer.
Yeah. Well, okay. So it's definitely partially guns, but there are of course other countries that have a ton of guns that don't have the same social issues that we have, and I think that's also a huge factor in this. I think anybody saying like I know the sole and only not you, but like anybody is saying if this issue is solved, everything is solved. Like, I don't think that's going to be the case. So I'm going to get into that here in a minute because it actually touches on the whole term going postal. So the vast majority of what we consider mass shootings are kind of like the shit you would see on Cops or Live PD, right? Like it is a jilted lover shooting up like a barbecue or something, or an armed robbery with a single family household that there's a shooting involved in, or there's a dispute at the mall and somebody pulls out a gun and starts firing in the food court, or like what happened with the Super Bowl thing, right? Like this, like, now we know that was literally just some random guy who had a gun on him and someone looked at him the wrong way. He didn't like it, so he pulled his gun out. So I want to like differentiate that because it's a key distinction. Like there's a key distinction between idiotic human behavior and then calculated, deliberate acts of homicide, in my opinion. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, but also, yeah, absolutely. Like, remember that woman who shot Joel Osteen's church the other day?
Right.
Like she was like in like very serious medical care for mental illness and got to buy a gun.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So yes. Like that part of like our lack of gun control it's funny because I don't think I don't think very many reasonable people disagree that like that is objectively insane. And a story I'm going to touch on is going to be a part of that as well. There's a demographic of shooters that kind of gave birth to the phrase that we're kind of going into today of going postal. So I'm going to be covering basically like one or two examples of it, basically the first example of it, and then the most notable example of it, and then talk about like the post office in general and kind of like the place that it has in our social consciousness or the public
Hmm.
consciousness and why it is now pretty much synonymous with workplace violence.
Yep.
So part of it, I think, has to do with the fact that almost everyone at some point in your life interacts with the post office. We all see our letter carrier. We all, have to go pick up a book of stamps, or we used to at least. Like there's a connection we all have with it. And so when issues with something that we're all familiar with happens, we start to kind of draw associations. I put the example of
Hmm.
like if you found out that everybody who worked like the Fryomatic at McDonald's was shooting people at McDonald's, like you'd be like, okay, there's something going on here we should dig a little bit deeper into. And
Yeah.
that's what happened with the post office. So the term was initially, go ahead, sorry.
No, I just wanted to tell you that there's a shipping store in my town named Going Postal, and I'm like, that's inappropriate. Continue.
Yeah, yeah, I heard about that. In the
Yeah.
middle of my research, I heard about that. But I mean, it's almost like comedy now, right? Like it's such
Hmm.
a well used term at this point. So the term itself isn't actually as old as you might suspect. I was kind of shocked to learn this, Taylor. Like it was originally coined in 1993 in the St. Petersburg Times, and it was a
Of Russia or Florida?
Florida, but it was an internal moniker that the post office used itself. Apparently in Petersburg, the post office was trying to hold like a consortium to discuss like workplace incidences, and
Hmm.
that's when the term kind of was initially floated. And then some reporter for the St. Petersburg Times saw it, heard it, and then printed it, and then that went to the public consciousness as a result of that. So the first shooting at the post office didn't happen that year. That was just a year that this kind of the phrase kind of popped up. There
Hmm.
were a few of these shootings in the 1970s, and they got like fairly minimal press attention. And then a few in the early 1980s, but it really wasn't until 1986 that people really started being like, "There's something going on here." And what happened was in 1986, there was a post office in Edmond, Oklahoma, and a guy named Patrick Sherrill, who was a mail carrier for it, he walked in on August 20th, and off the back of some poor performance reviews, basically shot up the joint. He walked into work with three guns in his mailbag and started shooting his supervisors and coworkers, ultimately killing 14, wounding an
Oh my
additional
God.
six, and then shooting himself in the head. So
Ugh.
that was the first one in 1986. And we're like, what? Because that was a big one. Like that many people killed in one setting, like that was rare. That's like Columbine numbers, and Columbine was still
Yeah.
10 years away or 8 years away when this happened. So it really
Hmm.
drew people's attention to it, and people started kind of paying more and more attention to it. There was another shooting that happened. This was later on, and I'm gonna kind of touch on this one to show that like this is not like an issue that happened in 1986 and then went away. This happened in 2006. So there was a woman named Jennifer San Marco. She was born in 1961, and she lived in California. And for whatever reason, she has held every random odd federal job there was. She worked for a state prison. She worked for the police department. She was a lunch lady for a school. And eventually, her last career move was working at a post office. Technically, it was a
Hmm.
mail sorting facility, so it was like a warehouse building, but it was a post office essentially.
Hmm.
So she held that job for about 6 years, and around 2000, the year 2000, her behavior started changing in ways that resulted in her being reported by her coworkers to her higher ups. Specifically, a
Hmm.
guy named Dexter Shannon overheard her making some crude remarks about somebody that they both knew that had committed suicide. As a result, Dexter had seen a bunch of different behavior from her and reported her to the supervisors. And that resulted in Shannon getting a report saying that she has to report to the supervisor's office to discuss her behavior. She apparently lost her
Hmm.
shit to the point where the supervisor had to call the police to come calm her down. And during that incident, they ended up having to put her under arrest.
Wow.
She was subject to a 72-hour involuntary hold by a psychologist who evaluated her to figure out what is going on with her. But after 72 hours, they were like, well, we can't definitively say she's a danger to herself or others. So they released her from that hold. So again, systems, people falling into the system, systems breaking apart, systems failing. That's all kind of wrapped up into this, which we're going to get into in depth here in a moment around what the background of all this was.
Mm-hmm.
In January of 2006, she did something absolutely insane. She drove from Goleta, California, down to Los Angeles to her former apartment. It was an 818-mile drive that she made just so she could go to the old apartment building she lived in to kill one of her former neighbors. It was a woman named
God.
Beverly, what was it, Beverly Johnson? I wrote her name down. No, Beverly Graham. She found this woman, shot her in the head, killed her, and then hopped right back in her car and started driving right back to Goleta. Like she was
Oh my
gone. She was
God.
far gone. She goes back to her former office, and at that point, she had just been released from this involuntary hold. And as a result of that hold, the post office, her employer, had removed or revoked her credentials and her key card, so she technically shouldn't be able to get in anyways. But she got far enough to the parking lot to where she saw a former coworker point a gun at his head, say, "Give me your key card." The kid did it, and then he ran off.
Oh my God.
She ends up getting access to the facility, finding her supervisors and shooting 7 of her supervisors, killing them, as well as coworkers before turning the gun on herself and then shooting herself in the head. A lot of weird things that happened up to that point that technically aren't, well, sort of aren't illegal, but they were. If she had people in her life, then they would have probably got ahead of this.
Mm-hmm.
She had a habit of going to grocery stores and convenience stores and buying stuff and then throwing the stuff along with the receipt away right outside in the garbage can outside the store, which is kind of weird. People notice her
That's
doing
so
this.
weird. There's like,
Yeah,
so like a million years ago, I was listening to My Favorite Murder, and there's a woman who killed her husband. And please, someone tell me who this was because I can't remember exactly the details. But one thing that she was doing is she was washing their clothes but not drying them and folding them and putting them wet in the drawers. And just
weird.
like, so it's just like something like that that just like feels like, wait, what? Like,
So
why would
a
someone do
screw's
that?
loose, right? Like a
Yeah.
screw's.
Like
You know,
something is wrong because like, what are you doing? It's so weird.
Taylor, I've had
Yeah.
like my mind so preoccupied with work things lately. Tonight when I went to yoga, I like put my stuff in the cupboards, the locker room, and all that. And then I walked in and I started laying my mat down. And I realized I'm still wearing shoes. And I was like, oh my god! If anybody's paying attention, I look insane.
That could be worse.
It's true.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, fine, fine, fine.
I just want to let you know that you're okay first.
Thank you, thank you.
Mhm.
Some other things she would do is that she tried to go out and register a business in Goleta called the Racist Press to share her
Hmm.
opinions on minorities, which she was prevented from doing.
Wow. That's,
We took a
I
weird
mean,
turn. We took a
that's
weird turn.
very, very bold.
Right, right. She somehow claimed that the federal government was trying to mind control her and the rest of the population through the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which
Hmm.
kind of
That could,
sounds like
that
drag
could,
people reading to kids today.
exactly.
Like we eventually came full circle.
Yeah,
Um,
that's silly.
she was found walking around a strip mall talking to herself rather frequently. At one point, the gas station near her house that she would often go to. At one point, she stripped nude in front of customers, and the owner who knew her
Yeah.
just like kind of helped her out and was like, "We should. I'm not going to call the cops. We should just get you out of here." So she was having a rough time, and nobody really was able to point it out. But
Hmm.
getting into kind of like the logic behind it, it's actually really interesting and like kind of it's kind of like a microcosm of what we were discussing on the last episode, where you brought up the fact that a year's tuition in Colombia costs $200, and
Yeah.
now it's like I don't even know what you said, like tens of thousands of dollars.
It's $66,000. Yeah.
But adjusted for inflation, it should only be 3,000, right? That's what you
Yeah.
said. Yeah,
Exactly.
it just has to do with like how the economy works these days, which is kind of
Hmm.
like it's all suppositions because you can never totally understand what's going on with people that do stuff like this. There's a book by a guy named Stephen Musako called Beyond Going Postal. And Stephen was a former post office worker. He was a post office worker, he was a lifer. He ended up moving on to, I forgot the name of the exact department within the post office that he moved on to, but it had something to do with like managing it's like HR stuff, like how to improve people's life there and work life and all that stuff.
Hmm.
Um, his research pointed to the fact that 13% of all worker on worker violence was committed at the post office in the 1980s. even though the workforce of post office workers was 0.0075%. So it had like a 15, 16x higher rate of workplace violence than any other workplace environment out there in the 1980s.
Why?
And
Tell me why.
so his research points to several things. One is that workplace satisfaction was unusually low amongst postal workers compared to any other profession that was out there, but it also had a lot to do with the post office as a branch of the government versus a branch of private enterprise. So
Hmm.
one thing to note is that in the 1970s, I looked this up, the average salary of a household was $7,600. By that spectrum, just to get a sense, teachers were getting paid $11,600. Doctors were very high paid at $53,000. By comparison, salaries at the post office was about 40% over the national average of $13,500, outpacing wages of other workers. So it was entirely conceivable to not be college educated, not be well read, well versed, well anything, come out of high school, you work for 30, 40 years at the post office, you
Hmm.
would earn more than the national average as a medium income. And it
Hmm.
was at that time enough for you to buy a single family home, two cars, vacations with the family and the kids every summer, do like have
Totally.
a very reasonable normal life and retire with a pension, like with a pension plan, with a 401k, like all the benefits that come from, life at that in that era.
Hmm. Hmm.
So what happened was that in 1970, sorry, to back up real quick, the US Post Office was a federal agency up
Hmm.
until 1970. So up until 1970, it was like what we discussed a long time ago around air traffic controllers, how that was part of the federal government. Like you cannot unionize and you cannot strike as part of the federal government. That's just part of the function. Like imagine if the Air Force decides they're going to go on strike, and it's like we're at war. Like
Right, you
we're all
can't.
going to die. You can't do it.
Hmm.
And so that was the situation here. And what happened was that there was complaints about working conditions and all that stuff. And so what happened was that there was an 8-day strike in 1970 that happened. And Nixon technically was, as president of the United States, was the end of the line with negotiations on this. And so he ended up approving a bunch of things, approving a bunch of pay raises and all that stuff. But he also said, look, y'all went on strike. It's illegal for you to go on strike. We're going to change this. And he passed what's called the Postal Reorganization Act. And what that did was now what we're going to do is say, if y'all want to act like a private enterprise, we're just going to make you a private enterprise. So
Hmm.
you're no longer a part of the federal government. You can compete out there in the open market. And on top of that, you will no longer have a monopoly on mail delivery, which is what gave rise to the birth of UPS, FedEx, and
Right.
all
I
these
was
other
gonna
things.
ask you to say that. Like, it does make sense that they would be like, only we can do this until you can't, and then now you have all the other things. And can I tell you how annoying it is? Because like we were returning something and had to go to like 6 places to get a FedEx person that would take it.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
love the
mean,
post
yeah, it's not
office.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so as part of that, it means that they had to start keeping track with the regular economy. Which I looked this up. The expectations on pay raises for the U.S. Postal Service, it's not totally even, but it was somewhere around the 20% pay raise every 5 years, give or take. So it was very predictable that like people who joined the post office in like the 1960s and like at the very
Hmm.
beginning of the 70s, or I mean even up to like the mid to late 70s, this all started happening in like the 80s really. So they expected a certain standard of living. They're like, hey, like, I hate to put it this way, it was like I deserve better. Like I was promised this life. Why can't I have
Yeah.
this life? And all of it is boils down to this Postal Reorganization Act, because what ended up happening was that the whip started kind of cracking on
Hmm.
supervisors saying, hey, we have to be very deliberate and very diligent about the way we're delivering packages and the mail. And it took away all autonomy and structure. It was like, you have to hit this many homes on this day, starting at this time. It was very
Right. It
structured. And as a
became like a
result,
business.
it became like a business and they became accountable to like market forces. And
Hmm.
also, because of that, they weren't able to get the same amount of pay raises that they were accustomed to. So all of a sudden, the standard of living of somebody who worked for the post office dropped compared to the rest of America because you had this
Hmm.
giant agency that was now uh, dedicated to paying out pensions and all this stuff to people who had retired forever ago. And FedEx didn't have that. UPS didn't have that. They didn't have the overhead that these guys had to deal with. So like it kind of was forced into being a failed entity by virtue of this
Hmm.
reorganization act. And so that's part of the reason why people think that the post office has this thing is because all these adults who came into the workforce had this understanding of this is what my life is going to be like. They join and realize that I have no leeway in my workflow. Like, can you imagine that?
Hmm.
Can you imagine like you have to be at work at 7 a.m. every day on the dot, dressed this way, and you have to pick this up at this time. And every single house you have to hit has to be hit within this time window, so you can get back here exactly at 5 o'clock, clock out. Like it's
No,
dude,
like
in
I
the middle of recording this podcast, I started watching the Gore Vidal video. Like it's just like it's crazy.
I know I can't like I had my friend one of my friends in New York is a school counselor and she was a teacher for a long time and we were talking about our jobs and she was like, "Wait, you can do whatever you want?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah. Like my job is to like, I do stuff and I plan things, but like I don't have a schedule that's like that." And like a teacher does. A teacher has a schedule that's like you have to do this right now and this right now and this right now. And my schedule is more like I make it and if I can't do something, I can say no. Like
Yeah,
I feel
yeah,
very lucky that
and
I don't maybe people thrive like that, but for me, I'm like that's not for me. I like to have this flexibility.
that was one takeaway from this research was that above pay, above status symbols or whatever else, people crave autonomy. Like if you take away complete autonomy and control over someone, they lash out and act out in ways like you're trying to like do something to me. Like it actually
Hmm.
like is a pretty good like justification for why people choose to be like managers. Like being managers fucking sucks. Like it's like a horrible job. Like you're accountable, dependable to people and like everybody else. And
Hmm.
like the pay usually isn't that great. Like, but you want the autonomy over your life, and that's what they were with this person. What was his name? I
Yeah.
forgot his name already. Stephen Masako was saying the ongoing post was like that's why the post office was forced into a market condition way after the time when it could compete with those market conditions. And the
Hmm.
pressure from above came down on the workers in a way that no other workforce experienced.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why there's also rumors that this thing called the ZMT machine, called the zip machine translator or the letter mail sorter, is also a reason why they would go nuts. But I don't know. It's all speculation
Wait, why did the mail sorter make them crazy? Because
because
it,
it's a fast moving repetitious action of like zip code this go here, zip code this go
yeah,
here. Like it is people aren't robots, and if you make them act
yeah.
like robots it's going to drive them insane. And I can't think of a worse, like, I mean, the DMV, the IRS office, the post office. Like I can't think of a more depressing places to work. It's just a gray existence. It's so I don't know. I couldn't
I
do
went
it.
to the two best things about living in a small town are the DMV and the post office because you don't have to wait in line. So you just like the DMV, you can just go in and out. Post office, there's never anyone there. One time I went to the post office, there were no cars in the front. And I walked in and there was no one there and like anything. And there was like a bell and I rang the bell and the lady like came from the back and she was like, "Hi." And I was like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Blink twice if you're like being robbed," because there was like nobody there. And she was like, "Oh no, I'm just hanging out. It's fine. It's lovely."
Okay, yeah, but we used to live in LA, and I would go to the post office every now and then. LA, I was like, dude, fuck this place. Like, it
Exactly.
is,
No, it's lovely in a small town and it is rough everywhere else.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's the story. There's so many stats on this. I pulled together a spreadsheet of all the postal shootings. What I wanted to do was feed that through ChatGPT and have it run a graph or create a graph of like all
Hmm.
shootings mixed with like postal shootings because like I said, like when we think of mass shootings, like so much of our thoughts go directly to like somebody opening fire at a festival or like a
Right.
movie theater. But it's just not that. Like it's just not that. It is the vast majority is like an idiot got into a fight because someone looked at his girl's butt, right? Like
Right.
and then pulled a gun. Like that's it.
And like
It's like
happen to have a
that's
gun.
majority. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. So But these are a weird anomaly, and they're not slowing down. The latest one was in 2022.
Wow.
So yeah, it's still going on. It's still a thing. And the good news is that I read this hilarious thing where the post office put together a research group on postal shootings, and what they said was that a postal worker is no more likely to get shot than a convenience store worker or a taxi driver. And
Those are the most
researchers were,
dangerous jobs.
but no, what was funny was like researchers were like, those people get shot by people who are robbing them, by other people. They don't get shot by other
Right.
store employees. So,
Oh my God.
um, yeah,
Totally. Um, yeah, that's crazy. That's really sad that like job that is so important because I love mail. Miles just like wrote a bunch of letters. I'll mail you one. It says, "Will you be my friend?" I'll mail you one. They're real cute. But like I
please.
love sending mail to people. I love getting the mail. It's really important. And it bums me out when people are like, like I've seen people in like the government be like, "Well, the Postal Service hasn't made any money." You're like, "It's a service. It's not supposed to make money. It's a service to people." And
No,
then
it does though. That's the thing. After the Reorganization Act, they were like, you, if you're going to act like a private enterprise, you have. We're going to make you a private enterprise. So that's the issue. The issue is they actually do have to make money now.
mm-hmm.
But before it was a part of the government agency, they didn't. It was all taxpayer funded.
Oh.
But there's been a lot of like really interesting takes on the post office. Like one of them was that post offices are in a lot of places where banks aren't. And one way to help
Mm-hmm.
people out who are less advantaged is to put some sort of banking capabilities within the purview of post offices.
I know they do
There's
money orders, and we've talked about like unbanked places before as well.
or like another example. I mean, these are all terrible. But like another example was food deserts, because like a
Hmm.
lot of places like also don't have access to good healthy food. And
Absolutely.
but like, how would you? I mean, no. This is one of those things where it feels like either it needs to get put back into under government control, or it needs to just revamp itself in a way that it's not so soul crushing to people that
I
work
feel like it's a
there.
little bit of both. And like also like it reminds me, okay, have you seen that terrible movie with Kevin Costner, The Postman?
No, I haven't, but I heard a lot about
It is not as bad as Amelia, but really bad. And I think remember when it ended, yeah, I was so mad. It's like, 4 hours of my life. And when the ending, I was like, this is so stupid. I'm so mad. But he becomes a postman, and I think the premise is like it's like the apocalypse, and he finds this postman's uniform in like a mail truck, but it's like on like a medical skeleton. Like they didn't even try, and he like takes it off and like wears it, and he accidentally becomes the one who delivers letters, and people really need that. And that also happened in the San Francisco fire that we just talked about, because pe once the mail started going, people were so relieved, people just like needed that communication to their friends and family. They needed to be able to tell people that they were okay. Like it's something that like such an essential service.
it. Yeah. Is it still essential?
Yes, I love it. Please mail me something.
I don't even know how you use the mail. I'll be honest with you.
I
I
go
don't
every
use the
day. I
post
have
office.
tons of
I know
stamps
you
here.
do. I know you do because you've literally sent me more things in the 15 years I've known you than anybody in my entire life has ever sent me.
It's true. I mail people things all the time. I was talking to my friend Julia. Remember that state? Remember, the state, that comedy group?
No.
I'll send it to you. They have a thing where it's like the mailman doesn't deliver anymore. He puts tacos in everybody's mailboxes, and everybody's like, listen, man, like I love the tacos, but I also like need to pay my bills. And it's just so funny. And I mailed my friend Julia a taco, like not a real one, but like a picture of a taco one time. I love it. I'm gonna mail you something today.
Taylor, I'll be honest with you. I don't know how stamps work. And so as a result, I literally only use FedEx because I go to FedEx and I say, I need to send this somewhere. What do I do with it? And like, here's a package. And what do I do now? It's like, put the address here, put the address here. And they give it to me. I'm
Annoying.
like, very cool. And I have like a book of stamps. I don't know why I bought this. I don't know what
That's
the
so
utility
funny.
of it is. Anyways, that is, I know, a little bit of a light story. It's been a long week for me and a long weekend, so apologies.
No, but that's interesting. And they definitely shouldn't have named that store here Going Postal. And um, that's sad. You should be safe at work, especially with a job that's not dangerous. Like, if you are a pilot on a stunt pilot, fine. But if you are, a post office worker, that sucks. And I'm sorry to hear that about them.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, again, your postman is not going to start shooting into your house. Like they're only going to kill their own. So like you're safe.
Yeah. I went out last week to check my mailbox, and then the mail lady was coming up the street in her truck, and I was embarrassed because I was at the mailbox already, and then we both laughed, and then she handed me my stuff.
Aw, that's fun. I always wave my post person because I'm like, man, thanks for getting in that hot car and just driving around with the door open.
I
Like
leave them water sometimes. Like in the summer, I'll like freeze water in the freezer, and I'll put it in the mailbox so that by the time they get it, it's still cold. Because it's just like 115, and you're as you said, there's no door, no window.
you're so thoughtful.
I know.
So yeah, that's our story this week. Taylor, thank you for indulging my
Farmers.
curiosity on postal shootings.
Thank you. I will, yeah, I will. If anyone has any other ideas for us, we're at doomtofailpod@gmail.com and all the socials at doomtofailpod. And we will be back next week with more
Woo!
women's history stuff for me and,
Who
whatever you want
knows? Who knows from what for me?
to do.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thanks, Taylor.
Thanks, Faris.